Hi, boys and girls. We're back to the Magic Treehouse. So we are on book 11, Lions at Lunchtime. And since Miss Lion is going to be reading you this story, I thought that was pretty cool. I've always loved lions because of my name. So this is number 11. Here we go. It starts with a picture. Here's the picture. Before lunch. Jack and Annie were walking home from the grocery store, and Jack's pack was heavy. It held a big jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread. "Are you going to have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?" said Annie, "or a peanut butter and honey sandwich?" Jack started to answer, but he stopped. "Oh, man," he whispered. "What is it?" said Annie. "Look at that." And as we could see in the picture, there's an animal that doesn't look like it belongs on a street in a small town. He pointed to the edge of Frog Creek Woods, and in the shadow was a small, delicate animal. It looked like a tiny deer. "It's a sign," whispered Annie. "Remember, we saw the rabbit, and he was a sign of the Wild West." The deer-like creature leaped into the woods. Jack and Annie didn't stop to think. They followed as fast as they could, and Jack's heavy pack thumping against the back as he ran. Finally, they stopped and looked around. "Where did she go?" said Annie. "I don't see her." "Wow," said Annie. She pointed up. There was the magic treehouse. It was shining in the noon sun and at the top of the tallest tree. Its rope ladder swayed in the shadows. "Where's Morgan?" Annie said. Morgan Le Fay wasn't waving to them. She wasn't even in the window. "I don't know. Let's go up." They climbed the ladder and went into the treehouse, and sunlight streamed through the windows. It lit a stack of books and two scrolls in the corner. The ancient scrolls held the answer to Jack and Annie's riddles they'd solved earlier. Jack took off his heavy backpack. "Did Morgan leave us a third riddle?" "Looking for someone?" said a voice. Jack and Annie whirled around. "Morgan!" they both cried. Morgan Le Fay appeared out of nowhere. She looked ancient and lovely in the bright light. "Do you want to become master librarians?" she asked Jack and Annie. "So you can help me with my work?" "Yes," they both answered. "Wonderful," Morgan said. Then she reached into her robe and pulled out the scroll. "You've got 2 riddles to solve so far, and here's your third," she said. And for your research, she pulled out a book from her robe and handed it to Jack. The book's cover said, "The Plains of Africa." "Africa?" said Jack. "Oh, man, I've always wanted to go there." She opened the book, and he and Annie stared at the picture. It showed hordes of zebras, tall giraffes, and big animals with horns and tiny deer-like creatures. "Hey, that's the animal that led us here." "A Thompson gazelle, I believe," Morgan said. "Where are the lions?" said Jack. "Oh, you'll find them," said Morgan. Maybe we need to plan the trip," said Jack. Morgan smiled. "No, go ahead. Make your wish right now." So Annie pointed to the picture. "I wish I could go there." "Be careful," said Morgan. "Just keep an eye out." "What for what?" said Jack. "The lions, of course," she said. "Well, wait, what? What do you mean?" But it was too late. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. The treehouse spun faster and faster, and then everything was still, absolutely still. Chapter 2. Jump, Beasts, Jump. Bright lights filled the treehouse again, and a rustling sound came from outside the window. Annie peeked out and laughed. "Hey there," she said. Jack looked out, too. A giraffe was eating trees off a leaf. It had a goofy, sweet face, and Jack peered out to the world beyond the giraffe, and he couldn't believe his eyes. He saw a huge grassy plain, a wide river, and tons of birds and animals, more than he'd ever imagined could be in one place. Look at this great picture. Giraffes and zebras were on the side river where Jack and Annie were, and Thompson gazelles and bighorn animals were on the other side. "Well, where are the lions?" said Jack. "I don't know," said Annie. "Do you think it's always this crowded here?" Let's find out," said Jack. He picked up the book on Africa and looked at the picture of the animals, and he read out loud. "Every year in the late spring, thousands of zebras and gazelles and millions of wildebeests migrate from the dry plains of the Tanzania to Kenya." "What's migrate mean?" said Annie. Jack pushed his glasses into place. "It means they go somewhere else for part of the year." Their birds were going south for the winter. Oh, right, said Annie. Jack turned to the page to read more. Before they are safe in Africa, the animals must first cross the Mara River. Zebras go first, then the wildebeests, and then the tiny gazelles swim last. Said Annie in a sad voice. What's wrong? Poor beasts, she looked out the window. They seem afraid. On the far side of the river, animals were standing at the edge of a steep bank in the river, and they stared down nervously at the rushing water. Jump, beast, jump, Annie shouted. Don't be silly, said Jack. They can't hear you. He studied the broad plain. I wonder where those lions are, he said. I don't know, but I've got to go. Well, go where, said Jack. To the river. I'm going to help them. Who are you helping, said Jack. Those beasts on the other side. I have to help them migrate. Are you nuts, said Jack. Annie handed Jack the scroll and started out of the treehouse. Wait a second. We haven't even read the riddle yet. Annie stopped on the ladder. Well, read it now, she said. Jack unrolled the ancient scroll and read. I'm the color of gold and as sweet can be, but beware of the danger that's all around me. What am I? Annie started down. Annie? We'll look for the answer in a minute. Well, what are you doing? Said Jack. But there was no stopping her. Jack watched as she jumped off the ladder, and then she started to walk through the tall grass. Between the zebras and the giraffes, I don't believe her, he said to himself, but he quickly put the Africa book in his backpack and he started down the ladder. And then he stepped onto the ground. He looked around carefully. The giraffes were eating the tree leaves, and the zebras were grazing in the grass. Tons of birds flapped overhead. This is okay, he thought. He just had one little question. Where were the lions? Chapter 3 is Disaster. Come on, Jack, Annie called. She was almost to the river. Hey, just a minute, he shouted. He wanted to study the giraffes and the zebras, so he pulled out the Africa book and he found a picture of giraffes, and he read, The giraffe is the tallest animal in the world. Its legs alone can be 6 feet tall, and its hooves can be as big as a dinner plate. So right now I want you to imagine your dinner plate. Put it in front of you like that and think about that's the bottom of a giraffe's hoof. Wow, big. Giraffes have a very powerful kick, which makes them dangerous to attack, and for this reason, lions tend to avoid going near giraffes. Jack pulled out his notebook and he wrote, Notes on Africa. Lions avoid giraffes. He turned to the page and read more. Zebras lived in family groups. As no two zebras have exactly the same pattern of stripes, and every baby zebra must learn its own mother's pattern. Jack studied the zebras, trying to see their different patterns, but in the hazy afternoon light, it was all stripy and dizzy. He blinked to clear his head, and then he read more. Zebras are the first to come across the river because they eat the coarsest grass. After they've thinned down the top layer, the wildebeests arrive, and they eat the next layer of grass. They prepare the grass for the final of gazelles, who come last. Wow, said Jack. So each animal depends on the animal that eats before for their food. So he wrote in his book, All Animals Connected. Jack heard Annie shout from the riverbank, Jump, beast, jump! You can do it! Don't be afraid! Come on! He looked up and Annie herself was jumping as she called to the wildebeests. Jack sighed. I better stop her before there's trouble, he thought. He put away the Africa book and his notebook, and he jogged towards the river. His pack was heavy and bumping against his back, and he'd forgotten to take out the jar of peanut butter and loaf of bread. So Jack decided to leave it at the treehouse, and he turned to go back. Just then, Annie's shouting had stopped, and Jack looked at the river. His sister had disappeared. Annie, he called. But there was no answer. Where is she? Annie! Jack shouted again. She'd completely disappeared. Oh, man, said Jack. Their trip had barely begun, and already disaster had struck. He'd forgotten about the stuff in his backpack, and he ran as fast as he could towards his sister. He wove his way between the grazing zebras and giraffes as he raced, and then he heard, Help! Coming from Annie. And that there, boys and girls, is the end of our first video on Lions at Lunchtime. Tune in next time.